It was one time during one of the conversation in 2012. That's when though it wasn't that really materialized into what it is now, but I think that was the first time that I was starting to hear and we started to talk about the different weather that we go through.
So yes, myself, Pauline used to call us on how's the weather, how's everybody, when it's downfall, and she said, and he said, are you okay? So we didn't know it was a weather watch program going on.
She used to call up asking us about the weather in our area and all that. But the term Women's Weather Watch, I got to hear about it and know what it meant last year. Maybe in 2013, because I'm living in a place where it's flood prone. So she usually call and ask whether the roads are okay or it's flooded and all that.
femLINKpacific's Women's Weather Watch campaign was established in 2004, a response to women's invisibility in both the reporting of natural disasters and other weather events, as well as the development in humanitarian systems and structures. It continues more than a dozen years on, constantly challenging the status quo.
I think it was actually adopted from that conversation Sharon and I used to have when she came to visit me in 2004. We had just had a big flood in Lambasa, and I was, I can say, a victim of that flood because the house we were staying in was blown away, washed away in the river. And that's when we begin. I personally had to shift house, and then that's where we bought the house where I'm staying at the moment with my brother. And it was in our conversation with Sharon, looking at listening and observing the weather forecast at that time. And I said, there's nobody that's actually listening to what women are facing right there and then during the time of disaster. Yes, we are listening, but for example, for us in Lambasa, they had announced that the weather that was going to hit Western more than the North, but the North was hit. And then we begin this conversation about Women's Weather Watch, and then Sharon thought it would be a good idea to have also, if we could just send SMS. I just had one phone then, and Sharon had the only BlackBerry, I think, in that time. And so we began by sending SMS, and that's really when the Women's Weather Watch became, part of our activity and a project of femLINKpacific.
After that, and I was listening the word Women's Weather Watch, but I was not knowing what do we mean by Women's Weather Watch. In 2012, when a big flooding came to Korotari River, to Lambasa River, then I come across to know what is Women's Weather Watch when Sharon was texting me, giving me information. I think she was out of Fiji, but still she was giving me information. When I was scared, I was sleeping in the cooperative dairy shop, looking after my house together with the cooperative shop. I was very fear at that moment that what is going to happen, because the rain was it was raining heavily and the strong wind was blowing. For me, I was not understanding who is going to help me. I was very much scared. I was just beside my family, my in-laws and my husband, wondering about the cooperative shop, that what might happen, because we just opened our cooperative shop 2 months ago and this cyclone is approaching, and my memory was lost. What to be done? But I'm glad when Anivasu and Sharon text me, giving me a Women's Weather Watch, because the radio was not working at that moment and we did not have any electricity. It was all blank, so no information was given to me. So I thank this femLINKpacific, especially the Sharon and Anivasu, who were giving me information about Women's Weather Watch. Then I come across to know what is Women's Weather Watch.
Sharon Bhagwan-Rolls, femLINKpacific Executive Producer Director, explains the Women's Weather Watch model as it is today.
It's a woman's response to humanitarian issues. The Women's Weather Watch model actually started because Andi Vasu and I, and she was their now correspondent in
Lambasa, happened to visit a group of women in Vunimoli in Lambasa, and hearing from them that we were the first people who actually asked to meet with their group to find out what had happened after some floods, and that the way that their local advisory council at the time had basically reacted was not even consulting women. And they said, I distinctively remember them saying, he pulled up in his Pajero, got out, looked around, and didn't talk to us, and then drove away. So it was suddenly like, we need to tell, so what, then we asked them, what happened? How did you cope during the floods? And they talked about how they packed things and organized. And I actually remember asking quite naively, I think, so what do you need? Do you need clothes? Do you need, because you start thinking that these are all the standard items that people need after a natural disaster. And they said, oh no, we pack everything, we put them up in the rafters of our house. And so actually what we need were farming implements and agricultural supplies. So then we just started writing little stories. And then as you monitor the media, as we do as femLINK, to see that women's stories as a result of the floods were not coming through, the invisibility of women as, victims rather than as leaders and organizers. So slowly starting to pick up on these stories. We started to use SMS a little bit more as we started to have our network of conveners and correspondents.
But what does it mean to the other women in our network?
I would tell them that it's something that women share about whatever they are going through in their community, and like getting updates about how the weather will be like, and the preparedness and whatever that we had to get ready for in case of a cyclone or flooding or other natural disasters.
It's something femLINK is doing for the woman. At least they are alert us in the community through texting in the mobile or calling in the telephone, like Pauline was doing to us, and we are really alert. And sometimes the rain is falling, we didn't even care about it unless there was a tip from Pauline. How's your outside? Whether it's the rain coming, are you okay? So it gives us alert to be aware that the rain is falling, flood about to come, or the wind is blowing, hurricane is about to come, and we have to be alert by the weather watch tips that is coming from the convener to us.
If I get information from Women's Weather Watch from one of the femLINKpacific members, so what I do now, I do text back to all my members, especially for Banwali Bara Mahila Mandal. I'm there, we have 6 different community women, so I do text to all the president and secretaries, and they do also send to their members. I do send to my relatives, my friends and families, to let them know what is going to happen and what is happening now in future, what is going to happen. The Women's Weather Watch, what I get it from. Last this February one, when this cyclone approached Winston, I was again shocked, but there was no television, there was no radio. I am glad that when Sharon texted me back all the information, what is going to happen, because I was not alert what is going to happen when this Winston is going to approach Lambasa. So I thank this Women's Weather Watch giving me more information about especially this cyclone time.
We have been updating the women from the text messages or from the calls that we've received from our head office here at the Community Media Center in Suva. So I get a clear understanding that part of femLINKpacific's work with the Women's Weather Watch is an important tool of giving out the information to our rural, not only our rural network members, but also from the community that they represent. Let me just add on, because this information with the work femLINK is doing, SBI Community Media Network, and the use of our community radio in terms of Women's Weather Watch is an important tool, not only that we are hearing the news, not only that we are listening to the other women's stories, but having these updated weather updates to our rural women's network. Just like I've explained earlier, like a Women's Weather Watch is a kind of thing that keeps on monitoring the weather in terms of cyclones, storms, floods, disaster. As for me, being the convener for femLINKs based in this Western Division, what I found out for me personally is this: they have the lack in getting access to information and communication. What I meant is that most of them they live far from the nearest town. For example, 18 to 20 kilometers to access to town to get information through newspaper. Some of them they can afford to buy Fiji Times. For those areas, they do not have access to radio or to television. So we expect them to buy Fiji Times and be informed. But with the Women's Weather Watch, what I gathered and understand, this is how they monitor the weather, what they've been experiencing in the cyclone, and not only just the monitoring, but also having them as women, how they need to focus on preparedness, how they need to focus on protection, and also how in humanitarian assistance, because those three pillars is closely linked to the Women's Weather Watch.
If the member asked me about the Weather Watch, then I have to explain that femLINKpacific have given the text and we should prepare what's the needs. We have to prepare the food, livestock we have to put in a safe, and we should be prepared. And sometimes when we receive the Weather Watch, the category, they are unaware. That's what's the category means to rural women. They are confused when we had categories changing by 1 to nearly it comes to 5, and we can't understand, especially me, I don't understand that category, what's the mean, and suddenly it's come 5 category and we have lost all the things, and we were confused. Now I have know that what it means about the weather.
Na ve talanoa ninraki, because talanoa is our way, like I talanoa to Niru, it's me who's talanoa doing the talking. Ve talanoa is we both talking, and ninraki, so we both talking about the weather, ninraki. So that's exactly Women's Weather Watch. It's not just hearing the forecast from one angle, it's also informing about, yes, I am really facing that, or no, it is my friend on the other side of the island who's facing this more worse than me on the other side of the country. And also the whole network is talking. It's not just from the weather forecast to women and femLINK to women and women back to femLINK, but also women are talking amongst each other. And it has, like in our recent experience, women shared that it educated them that they shouldn't be living alone in times of disaster.
It's been an evolving campaign, because it first started by simply telling stories from rural communities, working with one BlackBerry, and hardly anyone was on mobile phones at that time, so we had one BlackBerry, and I would just write things up and then we would get them published, or we'd broadcast them whenever we had our community radio broadcasts, whether in Suva and then of course eventually in Lambasa, or in the mobile broadcasts. But it's evolved in terms of the linkages with 1325, and also in terms of being able to get more women connected through media, information, communication technology. So whether it's now SMS and sending SMS messages out to a core group of 150 rural women leaders, or using Facebook to be our media platform to communicate information. It's really evolved.
For women who've been part of femLINKpacific's network for anywhere between 12 and 2 years, the women shared just how they've seen the Women's Weather Watch model evolve over time.
We are like gathering like more information than we used to before. Like we all have access to the website, femLINK's website, and we get regular text messages and phone calls as well, and even message on what can say social media. So a lot has been changed since the last 3 years.
So one of the things that's changed is, if you think about back in 2004, there were very few of us as women who had mobile phones. So particularly in our rural communities, we were actually, I think we finally had a BlackBerry at femLINKpacific. So we had that kind of tool and technology. But now in 2016, all the women in our network have access to a mobile phone. They may not always have the credit to reply to you, but they certainly have the ability to receive information. What we started to do once we had the rural correspondents was getting the correspondents themselves to put out the alerts. And one of the people that was the most diligent was the late Pauline Fong, who would, she would just keep an eye on the Rewa River and would immediately mobilize and contact women. And then, she would be driving out and checking on communities because she had her own vehicle. So it was also seeing the different types of correspondence and communications. The other thing also was about women's communication and general communications following the 2000 political crises. So by 2004, women were still not as comfortable and safe to speak out publicly as a result of the events of 2000. And also because they were in cane farming communities where we went out, a lot of them were still very conscious about the politics of land. So the Women's Weather Watch was able to report on situations where women were not able, comfortable to speak out. So we collected information and then put it out.
I can see that it's involving more women because when the women come into these consultations, they are being informed about this Women's Weather Watch. Then they go out and share with other women. The messages been coming through, the weather bulletins been coming through, the text messages from femLINKpacific. Now then we can see a lot of women are aware of that.
In addition to more women's access to mobile phone technology, what has also changed is the fact that we now have more media content being produced by femLINKpacific as a feminist media organization. So back in 2004, occasionally it was the Community Radio Times or a community radio broadcast. So we've actually got a more demonstrated role of a women's media network. Because what hasn't changed, as I mentioned earlier, is the representation of women, or how women are still represented as victims rather than as the leaders that they are at the community level. What's changed for us is also looking more closely and making the linkages with the women, peace and security agenda and humanitarian crises. So not just in terms of humanitarian crises that are caused by armed conflicts and the movement of people, but actually making the linkages with climate change and intensifying natural disasters. So what we have now is not just UN Security Council Resolution 1325, but 2242, which has specific language around climate change, and that really brings the experiences of the Women's Weather Watch and experiences of women dealing with environmental security issues into the broader peace and security agenda.
So especially with the technology, I think when it started and when I started to get to hear it way back in 2011 and 12, I think most women haven't had phones then. But now most of them have got the phone, and that's why I think right now it is a very effective way of sending out messages, and also it can be frequent, for the experience that we've had with the last disaster. It was really frequent, and it was updated report every 10 minutes, and all the women had the phone. Yeah, I think from that time on, when we just get to hear it and pass it on by mouth, I think one of the big change and the advantages that is the use of the mobile, and most women now have got mobiles at home.
I've seen a change over time because since when we started, the network was small, and it was between femLINK and the few. At that time was only Lautoka and Ambassa and femLINK here in Suva. And the number have grown, and also the understanding of the project itself, Women's Weather Watch. At first, like some women said, we didn't understand it at first. What was our role in Women's Weather Watch? And we used to receive this text message, so we just read it, and it was for ourselves. Now they are sharing it. And also when I went to attend the World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in Japan, I talked about the Women's Weather Watch there. And for me, it was an eye-opening moment, not only for me, but light bulbs also for most of the countries in the Pacific as well as outside of the Pacific, across the globe. Because, women are raising their issues there, and the different states that attended that were also talking about strategies and what best we could do. And there was not many who were doing similar project as Women's Weather Watch. So for me, it really affirmed me to continue this journey, that it is important that as much as we can to keep that communication happening, most especially at that time, like we saw in Winston, even the DISMAC team, they couldn't visit these villages to help them run or take them from here to there, because there was just, the whole community was disabled. The trucks and boats cannot run. So, and then not long after that, electricity cut, and then not long after that, there was also a blackout in communications. So, even more, we can see that there is an area that we can expand on based on the Women's Weather Watch.
Why all this fuss, this investment, the time and resources put into the campaign? Because it works. It bridges the information gap that women are trying to overcome. It's a small boost in the right direction that yields changes 1,000-fold.
And for me, I'm really glad I get plenty texts from femLINK to remind me all the time especially with Winston. I get the message. Texts keep on coming to be alert that the wind is at this side of the Vitilev war coming from which direction. It gives me time to prepare for myself.
I'd say that it's quite successful and it's very effective for the woman in terms of information that is shared to them, because most of the time, most of these women are so tied up with their chores, and they don't get time to listen to radio and also on televisions. But most of them now have got a mobile phone, and it's something that they carry, 24/7. So I think it's quite successful using the Women's Weather Watch SMS.
I think Women's Weather Watch is quick information that's been given to the public before a natural disaster strikes. And I've just known about Women's Weather Watch from last year, but what I've seen is that it has really helped the women, because most of the women were not really aware about listening to these weather bulletins and not getting prepared before the natural disasters. But then when Women's Weather Watch came up this year, I have seen that a lot of women were really looking forward to listening and waiting for the text messages that's been coming through to them, informing them about the natural disaster that was about to strike. So that was a good thing, because what I've seen in Nandi and Lutoka, most of the comments they gave is like they've been thankful to femLINKpacific because of the messages, text messages that's been coming through to them before the cyclone or the flood or the natural disasters.
When the hurricane morning was there, then I received a text message from femLINKpacific. Then I started to text to my club members, the communities, because that time people thinking, they're just rushing and packing, they are confused, especially my club members.
With the femLINK SMS text messages that is coming from our community media center, women are well informed in terms of when they're reading this SMS message, they clearly understand that this report of Women's Weather Watch, when they read it, they clearly understand, compared to listening to the mainstream radio. Not I'm saying that they're not giving, in terms of, for them as rural women, how clearly they can understand, and that also links with their preparedness. So what has really changed from those past years till now is the way the messages has been coming to us. We have been receiving it on time. We have been informed of what we really need to know.
You people are doing a good work at the moment for us in the community. If only we can work together with some of the radio stations to keep us informed in our language and with people that are away from their family, so that they can come back near their family. Because with, for instance, Hurricane, we need men to be with us to help us in doing our moving and all those things.
At the moment, femLINK is doing a very good job, because whatever information that we are getting, we get to share it to the women around us, and even text messages we forward them. And but in case of like, if there is no power, we are thinking, if something can be done about that, where we can reach out to other women, because during disasters, we can go out and try to let them know. That's why we expecting if femLINK can do something about that, so that all women are aware in case there's something coming our way. At the extension of the FM Talk 89 FM, that will be a good idea, and even like ads on TV, on television, as like Fiji one, people can look at it and they can give a good response to that.
What I'd expect is that as we progress this agenda around the linkages between women, peace and security and humanitarian crises, that as we have done in the last 15 years, the organization will continue to keep focused on women, peace and security, because that's really the genesis of the organization, but also at the same time being able to extend the information out not just to and from women, but more strategically to and from the district offices, the governance levels, the agricultural sector, so that we're not just waiting for the public media space to provide that information, but we're actually stepping up to be that conduit of information. So when women want information about food security, as femLINKpacific, we are going into that space, asking the Ministry of Agriculture or the specialists around food security to talk to us so that we can deliver that information to women, and in doing so, ask the questions that women want answered at the same time. So taking it a step further, I think, so it's not just looking at the technical aspects of communicating, but recognizing that if we want to talk about evacuation centers, let's go and talk to people who organize evacuation centers and say, what are the ways in which evacuation centres are managed and organised, and why aren't they being done in this way, because that's what women want, and get that information to women in their communities. It'll empower them as leaders. It will also help them inform their communities as well.
Yeah, I just think that this Women's Weather Watch campaign is a big success. This is a very big success, and I think that we should explore more what can be done. Because as for the messages on weather bulletin that goes out, and according to the assessment and talking to the women, it's not effective, it's not frequent, and maybe we can explore more on what to do on this Women's Weather Watch, the SMS campaign, because I think it is quite a success with the rural women, the rural community.
We living in the rural area, so when especially when it is time for tropical cyclone, so what happens, our phone contacts is like low, the network is always sometimes low, and our radio gets off and our power gets off, so that time we are like blank, we don't get any information. But lucky that at times when our network comes, so we at least receive some information from femLINK. This happened recently 2 months ago, so I come across to know what is going on. I was telling my families and my friends that because we did not get any information that what time it's approaching Lambasa, and when this cyclone Winston went away, then we were thinking, my family, we were still thinking that Winston is going to approach, and it already went away far from Lambasa, but we were not alert of that. But when I read this Women's Weather Watch at 6 o'clock from Sharon, I come across to that it's already moved from Lambasa and it's gone far from Lambasa. So we were happy and glad to hear that, my families, that we have saved from this. So in future to come, I would like to have more information from femLINKpacific, like Women's Weather Watch.
While resources may go into something simple like a text message or just a call, does it change anything in the long run?
When we first started the Women's Weather Watch, and because we've actually started to engage with some of the more technical agencies, I really had to teach myself a lot of things. So I think I've changed in terms of my understanding, and also recognizing that whatever you do in the women's movement or within the organization or within the women, peace and security agenda, it's not just what you started with. You have to keep learning and growing and understanding. And it's similarly at a personal level, because the personal is political and it's connected to my work. It's also starting to look at, while we started with one community radio station in 2004, what have we been able to do as an organization in setting up a rural station? What have we learned? How can we do that? How can we replicate it? So at a personal level, it's also been about increasing my understanding of issues around public emergency broadcast systems, how to set up small radio stations and how they could be responsive. So there's a whole lot of personal, professional learning and understanding that is really empowering as well.
It has given me a lot of alert, because most of the time we are not aware of these cyclones. I mean, we are busy doing our chores, or we're busy doing other things that we forget to listen to the weather bulletins, and we forget to prepare ourselves before a natural disaster strikes.
Here before, I hardly hear the weather news. I hardly take time to hear weather bulletin, because in Arewa, in Nandi, we are prone to flooding, and it's just like a norm, and we just wait for the flood to come in. But for this Women's Weather Watch, not only it has helped me to prepare and help the other women as well, it has made me more aware, what's going around, and especially for myself, that's something, it helps me to prepare too, and helps me to communicate, especially to the women, and for Nandi, because where I come from, there's always flooding, and for this time, I keep calling the family right now. The last Wednesday, take the family to high ground, take them to Ratanabula or to the church, because the flood, as I'm hearing now, according to these text messages, will be very big and huge. Yes, it has helped me more prepared, and also help others to be more aware of the weather and get themselves prepared.
I've seen a lot of changes, Sian. It's that like before when we used to get the women's weather watch, I was thinking it was just personally for me and for my family. But coming to know that now it's changing, that when I receive this message, I do pass to all my friends and families whom I know, and even to those illiterate people, I read to them that this text has been, this women's weather watch has been given to us, and some of them, those who are illiterate in the community, we do tell them in Hindi that this is going to happen and this is approaching us and what is going to happen. So I think it's changing a lot. We're getting more knowledge on women's weather watch, what to be done.
For me personally, what has changed is, for me myself, how I have picked up my roles and responsibility in this time, in times of disaster, as Women's Weather Watch. Like as much as I receive messages from femLINKpacific, I also take pictures and send messages of what's happening on the ground, as well as my role as a woman in the community, how I then interact or communicate with the local, community members about what's happening there, and also when if I see anything that need to be done, I do it straight away. Like before, I would think, oh, maybe it's for them to do that. So the approach that I take now is a life matters. Somebody's life is everybody's business. So I straight away go there and talk. Like I was in a village when it was really raining heavily and water was starting to rise, and I saw children, little kids below kindergarten age, they were playing. I was new to that village, but I stood up and I called out, come on, enough rain bath, go home. Who's your mother? Where is she? And a woman heard me, and I said, who is the mother of these children? Can you tell her to take them home? They can get sick, they can drown. So that is the approach I take now as an individual. I do not wait for people to respond to their own lives. If I see it, I do it. I speak and I walk that talk as well.
First, I want to thank femLINKpacific because they have text us inform about the weather watch, because sometimes we don't have the source of radio in our community. Then we have received from the text, because especially me, I'm doing my income generating program. I've got goat farming in the cattle farming, and when I had the text, then I have to go and first I have to feed my goats and the cattle in a safe place after the cyclone.
There have been many developments in technology in general, but also for femLINKpacific as it grows as an organization. But has anything stayed the same?
I think the thing that is still the same is that the participation of women. It's one thing that we want to encourage, because through this Women's Weather Watch, women are the ones who, through experience, we've seen that they are the ones that really took time out for their family. And now we have more women.
What hasn't changed is the underrepresentation of women, that 12 years on, despite having, the Fiji government having ratified CEDAW back in '95, the adoption of the Women's Plan of Action, the fact that successive governments since 2004 have reaffirmed the Women's Plan of Action, but we haven't had the resources or the kind of political commitment to make the kinds of changes in terms of women's representation, particularly at local level governance. The fact that we still have the appointments of district advisory councillors that does not call for equal representation, or the nomination of women who are, rural women leaders making a difference. So, those sorts of things haven't changed. And I think in terms of one of the things that changes a lot, which possibly makes it a lot harder in terms of coordination, is the high level of changes within the UN system. Because, of course, people come in, they work for a couple of years, and then they leave. So one of the things we do need to be able to see is greater capacity and sustained capacity building at the country level to manage our humanitarian responses. What hasn't changed is the way information is delivered. So it's still very technical, even though thankfully we have another weather service, but not everyone can access it. So what has not changed is the affordability of information communication platforms, whether it's SMS technology or the internet.
Thank you for joining us for this look at Women's Weather Watch. Stay tuned to FemTalk 89 FM in Suva and Lambasa, or continue to enjoy our media initiatives online across our social media platforms.